All right, we are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Our guest this morning, Davidson County Sheriff Darren Hall. Always good to see him. We'll take your phone call, 737-7587. You know, Joe always wants to say hi.
All right.
Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hey, Joe.
Good morning, Joe.
Just a couple of questions and a comment. I know you made a suggestion about naming the new jail, and I haven't really heard any more about that. Give you a little rundown on that, and a couple of questions I've got. Well, with Crickson Corporation and the state not renewing that contract with them, is that going to affect you in it till they get the new jail built? And the last comment is, last night on 60 Minutes, they ran a program on Colorado, which is the largest state that had legalized marijuana. And the governor said, although it brought in a lot of money, he said, I would suggest any state that was even looking at this and to give a couple of years study to it, because it's causing a lot of problems, especially through the medical field, with babies being born with maybe their parents have been smoking marijuana and the babies are born and they've got marijuana in their system, and it affects their growth and their brains, because marijuana is different from alcohol. Once it's in your system, it goes into your organs, brain and everything else, where alcohol will dissipate and come out of your system. So people need to look at this real close before they jump on the bandwagon with legalizing marijuana. And say hello to Dad.
Hey, thank you, Joe. Thank
you. Did you watch the 60 Minutes piece? Okay, I didn't catch it all, but let me just, and you can, with what he said, marijuana does stay in your system longer, but eventually, like anything else, it gets out, whereas alcohol passes quickly. But, okay, I don't know how you took it. I saw the promos for it and some stories on it. Now, you have some doctors saying, yeah, there's some babies showing up with marijuana, which, of course, is bad and wrong. But my point is, it's bad and wrong if you're drinking a lot of alcohol and smoking cigarettes. Those things are legal. Yes, and now marijuana is legalized. That's another thing that people can smoke. But I mean, marijuana, just like cigarettes and alcohol, is legal. Right. And a responsible mother is not drinking and smoking when she's pregnant, just as a responsible mother should not be smoking marijuana. So I'm not sure that's an argument not to legalize marijuana, but maybe there's some other issues there.
You know, Joe is so informed every time he calls in, but he's right. There's a lot of things on there. I agreed with the governor, by the way, that he basically was saying, study our state over, you know, don't rush to do something silly. And I've never, you know, argued that you should legalize marijuana. I do think we should decriminalize it the way that we voted here in the city vote, given the situation that we're in here. But I think he's right. I think the governor's right and Joe's right that we need to get our hands around the data and the facts. You hit on the point I was making. You know, people shouldn't smoke cigarettes or shouldn't drink or shouldn't take some pharmaceuticals while they're pregnant. Right. I mean, you hear these advertisements all the time, you know, don't take this if you're pregnant. Well, I can't imagine someone smoking marijuana thinking that's doing any good for your child. Right. But nor are these other things that are legal. So my thought is that's one thing to weigh out. There are things about, you know, one of the more pressing issues in the country as it relates to, and they brought this up last night, is that we don't have a way to measure your level of intoxication. If I pull you over and you're under the influence,
how are they doing that?
They don't have a way to do it. It's field sobriety, basically.
So just getting balance and things like this. But
we need as we all have come to know, the breath alcohol content, you know, the test. We need the ability to test that legally, because what I think we care about in society, in my opinion, is that the person shouldn't be behind the wheel or at work or using a crane operator or whatever under the influence of something. And whether you smoked it a week ago, I'm not convinced that you're under the influence a week later. And so if we have a way to make sure that that's not impairing you, just like pulling you over behind the wheel, we don't have that in law enforcement. So I think that's the first big thing you need to get your hands around, and then to research the issues such as the medical, you know, the medical goings on in that state. For example, the edibles, they didn't think about this well. There's some overdose issues on the edibles because it didn't explain how much THC was in each product that you were buying. You stand in line now, it'll tell you how many calories there are and how, well, surely to God they can find a way to, if you want to buy a different type of beer in this city, it will tell you how much alcohol content each beer has in it. Well, it just feels like that's what they need to do with this product. And stuff like that. I'm not proposing or promoting the idea. I just think we have to balance it out. I think the governor of Colorado is right. It has a lot of upside in the way the money is generated, but on the other side there's some risk, and we should all kind of take a pause and watch to make sure and figure out what's best for each state. That's where I think we're headed.
Yeah, I think we'll all be looking at Oregon, Colorado, right. And just in terms of what's the story on naming the new jail? Where do we sit on that? I guess.
Yeah, I just my issue with it is that what is being built over there is a complex that the sheriff's office is going to run, whoever the sheriff is, whatever. In 1982, when that building was built, you had a third of the building was the police department. The very front of it was the administration of the police department, and the whole front end of the property was whoever the police department, police chief, and so forth. The middle of it was the jail, and then the rear end, this back end of it, was a garage for all the detectives and police department personnel, and you had the warrant division of the police department and a property room in the police department. That was all built into that property. This time, none of that's there. There's no police, no property, no warrants of the police department. That building will have three primary functions. It will be a detention facility for people who are being arrested, brought in off the street. It'll have a behavioral care center, which is really a mental health treatment center that we have designed that will allow us to divert people who are mentally ill. When they arrive, they will never go to be booked. They would be instead treated in what we're calling a behavioral care center. And it'll be the booking and releasing center. It'll be where everybody comes in and out and is turned over. But 99% of the people who work on that block in this new building will work for the sheriff's office. 99% of the functions will be the sheriff's office. So it makes no sense to call it the Criminal Justice Center. Keep in mind, there is no justice in this building. There's no courtrooms. Back in '82, you built 2 courtrooms. You had all the judges. So there's no justice, if you want to call that. That's over in the Birch building, which is now all of our courts.
Now, will there be a magistrate or a night court? Or
you'll have an electronic, there's no courtroom, electronic viewing of a judge who will see the arrestee and make probable cause for bond, but that's not a courtroom for purposes. There's no police other than the drive-through, drop-off function. And there's really no reason to call it a center of a bunch of different, back then you had all these things being brought together, police, sheriff, judges, you had a restaurant in there, you had the bond office from the clerk's office. All these things were all put under one roof, and so back then it made sense to call it the Criminal Justice Center.
Right.
That's not the way it's going to be this time. It's basically a complex. We're referring to it as the Sheriff's Office downtown complex.
They released some images, right? I don't know, and I'm not sure if we have it in our log back there, but maybe Mary or Rick could check. I thought I had seen something of the mock-ups, the sketches of what it may look like. If we can, we'll throw it up. If we can't, I thought it looked pretty neat. Now it's one level, well, not one level, but it's not like a skyscraper like this one.
There's about 4 stories in the jail, and then there's a one.
It looks sharp. What did you think?
I think it looks nice. I mean, I don't agree with the naming of it. They're calling it the Criminal Justice Center.
Right, and that's what you're saying.
And the other part of that, Nick, that you've heard me say before, is it's important for us to decriminalize the mentally ill. And 64 beds out of this whole thing, we're going to concentrate on treating the mentally ill, and I don't want it called the Criminal Justice Center. There's no justice in the building, and quite frankly, they're detainees. They haven't been convicted of anything.
So you're thinking that this might be something where you revisit it, or are you going to bring it up? Or I mean, you can name it after someone, or come up with a different name other than criminal justice. I see what you're saying. I mean, that's not really what it is. I guess they want to stick with it because that's how people remember it. I mean, it's what it was. So it's just stay with what's common or what's. I guess
here's an ironic twist.
We've become used to.
If you drive by there right now, and you can shoot a picture of it. On the outside of the building, it says Metropolitan Justice Center. It has never been called that.
No, you're right.
Because some politicians in some room decided what to put on the side of the building and never really thought about it, really. And so it became a name its own. It will happen that way this time. Because if you name it some generic thing that is not really the functionality of the building, the inmates, the family, the staff who work and live in that building will name it what it's going to be. It's just the way it is.
What do the inmates call it?
Yeah, today they would call it, they call it the Criminal Justice Center. That was became
CJC, right.
Right. And what will happen, just like you guys, we have an incident over there or someone being booked or released, we're going to be sending out press releases. We're going to be the one reaching out to and so what we call it, we being the agency, is what it'll become. It's just the way it is. It doesn't really, it's not about Darren, it's about, the fact is the agency called the Sheriff's Office will be notifying the media, hey, we've had an incident, or hey, we just had someone arrested, they're being released here. So what we define it as and what we notify you, here's the address and here's the name of the building, and we would call it the detention facility if it was in the jail. We would call it the behavioral care center if it was in the treatment unit, and we have an administrative part of that building, but it's not a courtroom, it's not justice, it's not criminal.
Gotcha.
It's really not. And so we just want to clean all that up as we go, and hopefully we'll get to that point. But again, 2 to 3 to 4 years after the building's running, whatever you put on the outside of it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to me that we just name it what it is, and it's a part of a complex that the Sheriff's Office is going to run. That's just the way it is.
Let's go next to Brian. Brian, good morning.
I was thinking Nashville Detention Center. He said Detention Center. That would be pretty mellow, pretty middle of the road.
Well, that would be what it is.
Yeah,
that's what it would be, I suppose.
I was thinking, how about Nashville Detention Center? And then he said it, and I was like, he might remember me. I was the guy, I don't know what the topic was. I think it might have been Black Lives Matter or something. And I was saying, like, hey, why can't we all just get along? Then he joked at the break. He goes, "Oh, Ryan, we don't live in Mayberry anymore." But I've always been interested in the history of the jail. Who was the most interesting character you ever had in there? I remember there was a car thief. He never hurt nobody. He was just stealing cars and he'd rebuild them, put engine in, and he was kind of a cool dude. And then there was another guy. He used to stomp on people's feet or something. That might have been before your time. Who's the most interesting character you had in there? Maybe not, real famous. And then who was also the most famous guy you had in there?
Wow.
That you remember? I'm just curious.
Yeah, remind folks, you've been sheriff, but before being sheriff, you were chief deputy for years. So you've been there how many years all told?
Since '88.
Wow, okay. All right,
so
think
nearly
about
30
it.
years.
Holy cow. Okay, so in 30 years, and there was some prior to that I'm sure Larry Britton could talk about.
Yeah, Larry.
But I mean, your 30 years.
And Brian, I love that question, by the way, because there are some, he's the foot stomper, as he called it. Probably the most, you'd have to be my age probably, but Rabbit Veach, who was famous for escaping and all, and he was kind of a car thief kind of guy, was a very interesting figure for the time. But there were a lot. I mean, I grew up in Nashville, so I can say this. I think for me as a Nashvilleian, I think the Marsha Trimble case really surpassed to me the whole Perry March, and even because I grew up, I was about Marsha Trimble's age. She was kidnapped as a Girl Scout and was killed, and it took 30 years basically to solve the murder, and that it ends up eventually being resolved and solved in the last 6 or 7 years here. And just the fact of what all I lived through as a kid and growing up, I remember around trick-or-treat time even, your family was very concerned because here was a child who was abducted, and no one was ever convicted for many years. But that was a personal and
that was a
story.
case, as opposed to the inmate. And his name is escaping me, who they convicted finally.
I can see him.
And I've got it. It'll come to me off the top of my head. But anyway, he was not incarcerated initially with you. So, in terms of the inmates,
I'll tell you some of the interesting ones. I mean, I started in '87, '88, but I was here a few weeks, and there was a minister here in town. His last name was Terry, and he had and was convicted of a church. He hired a maintenance man that looked a lot like him. He eventually kills the maintenance man, burns the church with the body, had cut the head and hands off of the person so it looked like he had burned up in the church, and fled. And so he was found later on, captured, brought back here.
What was his motive? Why did he do that?
For money. He was to have been killed in the church and shaved his head, changed his look and everything. And I mean, it was like national news.
Yeah, and he took, what money was there that he took off with?
Through the church, if I remember correctly.
He just absconded
in his life,
Wow. How long ago was that?
That had to be in the late 80s.
Amazing
88.
story.
And he hired this guy for a year. He looked like him physically.
Just with the whole plan.
And he cut the hands off because there was a tattoo or something, I think, and there was some other thing. But he, and it was just, and I'd been here, I walked in here a week, and I walked up and there he was, and I remember as a local person, that was like a huge case.
Was there any inmate that comes to mind that under no circumstance would you have ever turned your back on him? And I'm sure there were a lot of them, but was there some, and the really nasty ones after they're finally, go through the judicial process, go to the state system, maybe Riverbend or something like that. But when they're with you, someone who's really scary, bad,
yes. And believe it or not, his name was Paul Reed. It's not the one you know.
It's not the Paul Reed. No. You got to be kidding.
This was a gang. This was a gang member out of California, and he was so bad, staff and inmates. But I'll tell you what ends up happening. He would run the phones, which means he run the cell. If you was on the phone, he would take your time as an inmate, and he just ran the phones all the time. And so the inmates didn't like him. The staff, always a big physical guy.
Hang on, I want you to finish this story. We got to go to the break, but I really want to hear that. So we'll take a break. We'll let him finish his thoughts and take more of your calls right after this. Stay with us.